Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. So I'm doing this episode on July 4th, a little bit past my normal schedule. I don't really have a normal schedule, but this is what I'm going to do. It's a holiday, so I figured I might just do it today and talk about the last sort of holiday weekend. Although, obviously, the numbers from today and yesterday will be heightened much more than normal. I wonder if they're doing the Discount Tuesday today for July 4th. That would be like a double whammy. July 4th holiday and Discount Tuesday. It would be insane. Probably not going to happen. In any event, we're going to talk about last weekend, June 30th through July 2nd, like any normal weekend, like it wasn't a holiday. We're going to walk through the top 10, do a couple of deep dives. I started up a Twitter account over the weekend. I remember when Twitter launched 10 years ago, and I said to my friend who was really into it, I was at a diner in Chicago, and I remember he was all over Twitter, and I was like, what the fuck is that thing, and why the hell would you want to do that? Why do I want to know that you're eating French toast this morning? That's what, originally what Twitter was. It was very much a personal sort of diary of your day, almost like a live journal was. Obviously, everything's changed over the last 10 years, and I finally took the plunge on Twitter, and I have a personal account that I never use, but I opened it up account for the Wildline podcast. So get on Twitter. I'm going to tweet a lot about this stuff. I decided that the podcast is a great forum to talk about it, to sort of summarize what happened during the week and the weekend. But I have a lot of thoughts about this stuff. I read constantly about it. So I kind of want to post throughout the week pretty often. So if you want to get some interesting box office news and analysis, then follow me just at the Wildline podcast. Or actually, it's at the Wildline, if I'm right. Yeah, at the Wildline. In any event, so let's talk about the weekend. It is technically a holiday weekend, but we're only going to talk about the 3-day. Number one this weekend was Despicable Me, the Universal animation film. I don't know anything about this series. I don't have children. Even my friends who have kids, they weren't really talking about this film like they were like Beauty and the Beast or something like that. So it was not very buzzy at all. It came in only at 72, and these are the actuals now because I'm doing the show on Tuesday. The benefit of that is I get the actual numbers that came out yesterday afternoon. Only did 72. That is way below expectations. Well over 10 million off what they thought it was going to do. A lot of people online on the forums were also thinking that it was going to do posts over 100. I wasn't sure where they were getting that from. But that was the buzz about a week ago. People were thinking, oh yeah, 90s. Oh yeah, maybe even over 100. They were totally wrong. And I was right about this. I was thinking might get to the 80s, maybe. But I didn't see it doing that well. Compared to the other, Despicable Me and Minions movies. I honestly didn't even know Minions and Despicable Me was in the same series. So that's how clueless I am when it comes to this movie universe from Universal. So let's walk through it real quick. Despicable Me was the original, came out in July 2010, so 7 years ago, opened at 56, had a fantastic multiplier like most children's films do that are decent, ended up at 251. Actually, I'll adjust this for 2017 numbers so it's a little bit more accurate. So that was $288 million in today's dollars. And then you had in July, 3 years later, July 2013, Despicable Me 2 comes out, opens at 94, ends up at $414 million. I should know a lot more about this. If a movie's doing $400 million, I don't know what I was doing in the summer of 2013, probably working my ass off in New York. But $400 million for a movie is insane domestically. I got to check and see what it did internationally. That's just outrageous. I've been looking at a lot of different sort of genres over the last week, kind of figure out what's going on big picture at the multiplex. Specifically looking at rated R comedies and rom-coms and why those genres are sort of dying off a bit. But you never see a number like 400 million, even adjusted. So this is a massive movie. And so this is the sequel to that, right? So you would expect it to do somewhat similar. Now there was the offshoot Minions, which came out in 2015, That opened at 123 adjusted, ended up at 359 million total domestic. So these are absolutely huge films, much bigger than I didn't realize before I was looking at these numbers. And so what's interesting now is Despicable Me comes out this weekend. You're thinking, based on the Minions number, apparently what happened though was the quality of that film was very poor. The multiplier doesn't say that, but the feedback that I've heard about that film is it just was not very good. It was very memey at the time. Like everybody was super into it. It hit that really inflection point and tipping point where it just became part of normal conversation between people. And that's when a movie jumps from like the 200 millions into the 300 millions, 400 millions, something like Jurassic World, where it's like everybody just had to see it for whatever reason. And just like Jurassic World, the quality is very suspect on Minions. And so, coming into this weekend, there hasn't been, the last children's film that came out, I guess was about a month ago, was Cars 3. Well, that's only 3 weekends ago, so not that long ago. That underperforms, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. That underperforms. So the thought process here is that Despicable Me 3 was going to come in and sort of clean up that children's audience, right? And like, it's also holiday weekend, so you're thinking that like, okay, like this is going to be a big deal, and maybe it makes it up today and tomorrow with these numbers, but that weekend number is very low for this film. 72 million is just not that good. Also keep in mind, and I posted this on Twitter and I found this really fascinating, Despicable Me 3 is the widest opening movie of all time. Let that sink in. It is the widest opening of any movie ever. Bigger than any Twilight, bigger than any Star Wars movie. It opened on 4,529 screens, basically 4,500 screens. And that record, I don't think will be broken anytime soon. The last one held for a while. Now I have to look it up because I get so obsessive about these things. But even with that dramatically wide opening, Despicable Me 3 was just not able to convert its audience and not get that per theater average up there. The per theater average was just below 16,000. And so not a great performance. We'll see what it does today and tomorrow. I'm sure yesterday's numbers are out, but I can't see them right now. It'll probably make up some ground on that, but you want this to open at least in the 80s, definitely I would say in the 90s, and it's 20 below that. So something didn't go right here. I think the main culprit was probably the poor quality of Minions. People felt burnt, and that's what I was saying. I went on this weird long rant about Beauty and the Beast when it came out. I couldn't believe it was doing so well, and it kept the legs of it were insane. It's the number one movie of the year. But I was trying to make this point in the podcast that like the feedback that I got on the quality of that film was that it was not great. It was kind of fun and good. But people looking back at it are like, oh yeah, that was like an okay film. It felt more like a social event than anything. Just like I was talking before, it's like a meme. You just have to see it because everybody else is seeing it. But the quality of the film, apparently some people thought it was not good. And I wonder if that's going to come back to bite them when whatever comes out. What is it, Mulan and Aladdin, the other live action movies that are coming out? We'll see. But that was the case here with the Despicable Me 3. They basically got they got the backlash from the poor quality of Minions, and people just didn't come out to see it as much. And there was not a ton of buzz on this movie either. I will say that. And the people who did see it, I mean, critics wise, it got like a 62% Rotten Tomatoes, which is not great. The audience score is only 67% on Rotten Tomatoes. That 62% of the critics, their average rating was 5.7. That's terrible. That's not good. Like, this was objectively not a high quality film. And if you look on Metacritic, it's only got a 48. So people just didn't like this film at the end of the day, and that's really going to hurt its multiplier. Now, it's $72 million for the 3-day. We'll see what happens with the 5-day holiday with Monday and Tuesday added in. But you're hoping as a children's film, what's this going to end up at, right? Where's this going? Children's film from a major studio almost always has a 3x multiplier at least. The good ones, and I'm trying like Inside Out and like Zootopia, you're talking like, I believe 4 or maybe even 5 for those. I can't really remember, but over 4. So Despicable Me 3 does a 3x multiplier. You're looking at, from this 3-day weekend, which is kind of cheating a little bit because it's not really the full holiday weekend. You're looking at 210 million, which would be well below the other movies in this series. Minions ended up at I gotta adjust. Minions ended up at 359. Despicable Me 2 over $400 million. Like, this isn't gonna come anywhere near those. I can see why they made a third one, though. I mean, my God, these things print money. It's unbelievable. I can't believe that Despicable Me 2 made $400 million. Like, that just blows my mind. And the cost to produce these is not like a Marvel movie. So, they're making like $200-300 million in pure profit. I mean, it's amazing. So this one's going to underperform. My guess is that it does a 3x multiplier from this weekend, probably a little bit higher because it is a holiday weekend. That means it's going to be a little bit depressed because the holiday fell on a Tuesday this year. So you're probably looking at $230 million total. Not a bad take, but way, way, way below the previous film, which did over 400 million. You're talking, it could be potentially be almost $200 million less. That's a massive underperformance, absolutely massive. Now it makes more sense why it opened up at 4,500 screens, because if you're an executive or a distributor looking at those numbers from the last film, you're like, oh, this is do gangbusters. Like, we want to like fill this out. And just give you an idea, like $16,000 per theater average is great, but it's not a blockbuster level average. You got to be in the 20s. You got to be in the 20s. If you want to do really amazing, you got to be 30s and on higher. This thing didn't even crack 20 per theater. Now, obviously, because it's on so many theaters, it's a little bit depressed. But you would think opening weekend, you want to soak up all that audience. The audience just wasn't there, right? And so, we'll see where it goes. It's definitely an underperformance. We'll see how its legs go. But my interpretation of these scores, in terms of Rotten Tomato, Metacritic, all that kind of stuff, cinema scores, whatever, it got an A-. I don't know if that really means much, though. It's going to underperform a lot, and it could be well over 150 million less than the previous Despicable Me 2. So we'll keep an eye on that throughout the weeks, but definitely underperformance. Coming at number 2 for the 3-day was Baby Driver. Now, this one's kind of a surprise. Came in at $21 million for the 3-day weekend. Sits at $30 million. It actually opened on Wednesday of last week. So that 30 million is a 5-day total. That's on the high end of tracking. Now, when the preview numbers came in for this on Wednesday morning, because it technically opened Tuesday night for previews, I believe it did, I want to say 2.1 million in those previews. When I saw that number, I was like, wow, like this thing is going to pop off. And then the Wednesday number came in, the Thursday number came in, and it was like, oh, wait a second, maybe not. They were kind of lower than I thought they were going to be. But it turns out people turned up this weekend to see it. And you can't argue with the quality. I mean, it sits at 97% in Rotten Tomatoes right now, which is outrageous. The average score is 8.1 from critics. The audience score with 25,000 ratings on Rotten Tomatoes is 91%. So this is a bona fide critical smash hit and an audience mass appeal hit as well, right? This is just, they hit it out of the park. Edgar Wright did. He's the Shaun of the Dead, World's End, Hot Fuzz, very eclectic, eccentric type films that seem to want to adhere to a genre. Like Hot Fuzz was an action film and Shaun of the Dead was a zombie film, but clearly have their own language of the genre and really sort of ironic and almost parodies and satires of those genre. And Scott Pilgrim as well, of course. Now, the thing about him is his movies are, if you talk to kind of nerdy people into film, Edgar Wright is like this huge sort of Hercules in the movie world, nerd world, right? But when you talk to the average person, they might know the movie, they might have saw it on DVD. They're all sort of cult classics already. None of them have done well in the theaters. Absolutely none. I think it topped out at like 30 something maybe for Scott Pilgrim. So he's already, Edgar Wright has his first real hit here. And this one, I don't know, this one felt like kind of a risky bet. I think it was Sony, wasn't it, who put this out? Yeah, Sony, which is, they need to hit. Sony's probably going to get sold to Apple or something like that. I know they were looking to buy them. They're in financial trouble along with Paramount. But this is a risky move for them. It's rated R action movie. Baby Driver is kind of a weird name. The marketing was very well done. The thing it had going for it was the actors. You got Kevin Spacey, you've got Jamie Foxx, John Hamm, Ansel Elgort. I guess that's how you say his name. He's the dude from Fault in Your Stars. He's the lead. What else was he in? Fault in Your Stars and some other kind of really sappy movie. So the critics love this. The reviews have been out for weeks, which helped a lot, unlike The House, which you didn't see a review until the movie actually came out. So the critical buzz really got this going. And then I think what happened is the nerdy people like me went to go see it right away. I actually saw it on Saturday, so I'm lying. But the people who went to go see it right away are super, they're connected people. They're on Twitter. They like to talk about movies a lot. They went to go see it. They loved it. That sort of social media buzz then spread out to the masses. And there's not a lot else out there in the theater like this. Like a pure kind of only like 80s action movie. Just about like a bank getaway driver. It had a little, a little space in the multiplex of its own. And just attracted people, to be honest with you. And it seemed cool as fuck. I mean, that's what this movie is all about. It is just super cool and hip. And you could tell that from the marketing. And that just connected with people. Now, where's it going to go? I think this thing is going to... I was very skeptical that it was going to do well. Because if you look at Edgar Wright's past movies, despite the fact that all the nerds talk about it all the time, and they have a really high stature in the film world... commercially, they've been not failures, but pretty darn close. None of them have done very well. So my assumption was that this was going to be the same. It's going to be an amazing movie. People are going to love it. It's going to be a cult hit within like a year. But, it's going to make like 50 million tops in the theater. I was totally wrong. I get the feeling that this came along at just the right time in the summer. It's been kind of a really boring summer. Not a lot of good quality hit movies coming out. The blockbusters have been sort of failing, besides Wonder Woman. And I feel like this one's just going to ride the wave for a while. We got Spider-Man coming out. We got Planet of the Apes. I feel like this is just going to ride right past those and underneath them and make a really nice profit. I am expecting the multiplier on this. It only made 21 this weekend. So, for an action movie like this, anything north of 3 would be great. So you're talking at least the bottom basement of this is going to be 60s, 70s. Absolute basement, I think. I don't think it's going to do a sub 3x multiplier. And I think people are going to go see this over and over again. That's how good it is. I'm not going to get into my critical viewpoint of it. I thought it was a fantastic film with some significant problems. I'd give it an 82 out of 100, to be exact. It's the same problems that Edgar Wright movies always have, but I don't want to go down that road, so to speak. So it has 30 million so far. So I am thinking that, man, if this thing hits 100 million, I get the feeling that it's going to. I just get this feeling it's just gonna like drop, 30% each weekend, maybe a 40, maybe even a 20% next weekend. Maybe like a kind of like a Get Out was earlier this year with those insane drops for a horror movie. I think it's gonna burn rubber all the way to 100 million. I really do. It just has that feeling of a sleeper hit. At the end of the day, sleeper hit is always what? It's super, super high quality, and that's what this film is. It's like a super high quality action movie. You don't get those very often. Like usually those are so expensive. They're huge blockbusters. This is an exception. It's the little movie that could. It's not even really that little. It cost $34 million to make, but it's on like that weird, it's not even like a mid-grade film, a mid-grade action film. You're talking like in terms of budget, you're talking like 60, 70 million, not 34. I don't know. I'm really excited about this movie. I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that it's doing well. And I'm really glad that Edgar Wright finally has a hit on his hand. Obviously his career took a weird path where he was set up to do Ant-Man, got a few steps through that and sort of dropped out of the project because I think he just didn't see eye to eye with Marvel and Disney about where that character was going. Unfortunately, because I don't know, me in comic book movies, but I hated Ant-Man. I thought it was so boring and so just like just useless movie. Edgar Wright's version would have been so far superior. I know that for a fact. I can tell you right now it would have been better. So his career took a weird path, and I think Baby Driver was just his moment to say, hey, I've always wanted to do this film. I think he's had the idea for like 10 years. Sony's like, go for it. He basically let him have free reign, and it worked. It worked really darn well. So my fingers crossed. I'm rooting for this one. I'm thinking 100 million at the end of the day domestically. Internationally, no clue. And obviously in the UK it'll do well because he's British, and probably the rest of Europe. But I don't know how it's going to do, if it's even going to open in China or wherever. So hopefully we'll keep a track on Baby Driver and see if we can hit that 100 million mark. That would be a great accomplishment. That'd be 5x from its weekend gross this weekend, but it's a little weird, of course, because of the holiday. I'd really take that $30 million mark and say, like, where's it going to do off of that? It's going to do 3x of that. That's 90. I think 90 is totally doable. I think 100 is that stretch goal, and I think it might be able to do it. So Baby Driver is number 2 with $21 million. Number 3 this weekend was Transformers: The Last Night with $17 million for the 3-day. A pretty bad 62% drop. It actually gained 63 theaters this weekend, probably just for the holiday. It's on 4,100 theaters. Its per theater average is just over $4,100. Total take so far is only $102 million. I talked a lot about this one, believe last weekend. This isn't going anywhere. A 62% drop on an already really kind of low opening for a Transformers movie. This is the end of the series. I know last week I talked about maybe the international coming through. It's made $329 million internationally. It's a 25%, 75% domestic / foreign take so far. So worldwide it's made 435. This thing it's not going anywhere. It's kind of sad because there's no reason to make this film. Just absolutely no reason to make it. And they went ahead and did it. And, is it going to lose money? Blah, blah, blah. I don't know if it's going to lose money. I mean, if you look at the other ones, it's just not even in the same realm. Last night technically opened at 44, but that was also kind of a weird weekend. The other ones opened at like 100, 97, 108. They all have great legs, though. The problem here is this one's not so far. It's dropping 62%. For a major blockbuster action movie like this, you want it to be like around 50% drops. When you're dropping 60%, that just means this thing is going to exponentially fall off the cliff, essentially. Where's it going to end up? Definitely north of 200. You're probably thinking like, I said they all had great multipliers, but now that I'm looking, the early ones did, but the last one, Transformers: Age of Extinction, only had a 2.45x multiplier. So this one's probably going to limp across 200 million and probably be in the 225 million range, which is not good. And you kind of got to wonder now, like, this has got to be it, right? I don't think the foreign grosses are going to save this. I don't think they're going to make a ton of money off of this. Maybe they'll make like, 50 million or something like that, a little bit of profit. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it's worthwhile to spend all of your resources and money on this, because when you look at, the key metric that I always want to know about a film is its ROI, right? Return on investment. If you're spending $300 million and you're only getting back, and it's the cost on Transformers is well north of $300 million to release. You're talking $600 million to release it worldwide. That's production budget, marketing, distribution costs, all that stuff on all the platforms, digital, TV, streaming, blah, 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 blah. You're talking well over $500 million. So if you look at that, you say you spend $600 million and you only get 50 back in profit, sure, you broke even. It wasn't a loss. That's good because that's totally possible with a lot of movies, right? But your dollar profit for dollar spent is not good. And the reality is, if you can make other projects that have better ROIs, that's a better use of your money and time, because you're going to make more money that way. Because if that $600 million could be made for 3 separate movies and the ROIs on those 3 separate movies is higher than whatever it is going to be for this film, then, you know, you essentially left money on the table, right? It's not really seen as a loss per se, because you didn't lose money on the money you spent, but there's an opportunity cost to the money that you're spending on Transformers. And so, not to get too much in the weeds, but I think that that's an important part to think about this. And one thing that, in the conversations I had with people online about the box office and film, it's one of those frustrating aspects that a lot of people, for whatever reason, don't get. Just because you spend $600 million and make a $50 million profit doesn't mean that it's a great use of your money, because you could have made $300 million off of that $600 million, right? And so you have to always think about money in terms of what it can do for you. And I think the Transformers money is not doing what it needs to do for Paramount. Paramount's fucked anyways, let's be honest. Like, they're going to go out of business. They'd be lucky to last another year or two. They're going to get bought by somebody. They're going to be the first sort of gravestone of the streaming era, I think, and the golden age of TV era, where people are just, they're not willing to go to the theaters, and we're going to see that as we walk through the rest of the top 10. In any event, not a great performance at all by Transformers. Really terrible drop. I think it's going to continue to drop like that because Spider-Man's coming out, and that's like the exact demo for this film. So you're looking at, I don't know, it'll be lucky to hit the 220, 230 range. Probably won't. Probably more like just over 200 million total for this one. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. And probably the last one in the series. Okay, coming up at number 4 this weekend is the wonderful Wonder Woman, which I really got to see. As much as I am hyper skeptic of a lot of comic book movies, this one seems good enough to actually pay the money and see it in the theater, because I've only heard great things about it. And it's performing outrageously well. I mean, it's unbelievable. This is the Wonder Woman, I think, is definitely going to be the story, or one of the stories of the summer. I think one of the major stories of the year. It did 15.7 million for the 3-day week, only a 37% drop. That is outrageous. Lost 500 screens. Per theater average was 4,600. Compare that to the Transformers, which is at 4,100. Yeah, keep in mind Wonder Woman's in its 5th weekend. Total take so far is 346 million. It just blows my mind how well this is doing, and I've talked about it nonstop over the last few weekends, but I'm really excited about it because it's just a cool milestone. It's a cool milestone for everybody involved, really. It's for the director, for the character. It's just a big deal that a female superhero is now the number one superhero. Could be the number one superhero of the year, because Guardians of the Galaxy, it might catch up with it. It's sitting at $350 million as of today. That includes yesterday's take. And just to give you just some perspective on how well this is for the DCU little universe they have going on. Suicide Squad at this point in its run was only at $300 million. Batman vs. Superman was only at 319, and Man of Steel is at 281. So it has blown past the rest of the DCU films. That alone is a huge deal. And it doesn't seem like it's slowing down. I mean, people just really want to see this movie. And I think a lot of maybe like young women are going back to seeing it multiple times. The feedback that I've heard from people who have little girls are like, they love it so much, and it's such a big deal to them that there's this, strong woman on the screen who's a hero. Like, that's a huge fucking deal, especially in American culture, where we have some pretty significant problems with sexism and chauvinism, and that have not gone away, and have only gotten much, much worse since El Chito Benito got into office. But a great story. Wonder Woman, 37% drop. Not a lot more to say here. We're going to keep an eye on it for the rest of the summer. But I think it's one of the bigger stories, not just of the comic book universe, but of the box office at large for the entire year. It's kind of it's so interesting to me because DCU felt like it was on the downslide, right? Man of Steel, I hate it. Like, I'm skeptical of comic book movies. I've talked about this a lot. Man of Steel is not a good movie. Batman vs Superman is one of the worst movies I've ever seen, ever in terms of blockbusters. It was awful. And Suicide Squad was not good. So they had some significant, really big quality problems, and the multipliers of those films show that. Batman vs Superman had a sub 2x multiplier. That is unacceptable for a movie where you spent that type of budget, 200 million or 250 million, whatever it was. That's outrageous. It's an outrageous failure that should have got Zack Snyder fired from the entire series. There's no reason they should ever let him back in. And I know that he left Justice League because of the tragedy of his daughter and stuff like that. And I don't really have any comment on that, but I think that he was put in a position where he failed multiple times. To me, he failed with Watchmen as well. He's failed a lot. And I think it got to the point where it just wasn't working. And, I feel like they should have never let him do Justice League at all, to be honest with you. Just from a business perspective, I got nothing against the guy. I love his earlier movies. They're really cool. He's got an amazing style, right? But he does not have the story chops. He doesn't have it for this level of entertainment. He does not have it. And that's why DCU is losing big to Marvel. Now, again, his movies were making money, about $100 million, $150 million, I think, for Suicide Squad and Batman vs Superman. So, those are great. But again, back to the ROI. They should have made $200 million each in profit, at least. And I guarantee you the accountants and the financial people were expecting that. And when it came in at $50 and $100 million less than what they thought, that's a big deal. And so Wonder Woman is like a great home run for Warner Brothers and DCU, and they absolutely needed it because they were down to the bottom of the ninth with a single out. They needed a run to come in, and they got it with Wonder Woman. I also, when I talked, I went on a really long rant about this, but I'll just briefly recap what I said before. I think it signals a change in the genre of comic book movies. We are now going to single character stories that are more interesting and innovative than the large ensemble films. Guardians being the exception. We'll see how Justice League does this winter. I don't think it's going to do as well as Wonder Woman. I will tell you that right now, which sounds maybe outrageous to people because I'm sure that Justice League budget's double. It's got to be like $500 million for a production budget. It's outrageous. I just feel like Wonder Woman, the Deadpools, the Logans, that's the future of the genre, right? These interesting character studies that focus more on character development as opposed to, for all intents and purposes, explosions and throwing a lot of people on screen. I tried to watch Civil War. I've seen Civil War. I've seen Ultron. I just don't find them, and maybe because I'm kind of an asshole and a jerk, I don't find them entertaining. I don't care about those characters because they're on the screen for 5 minutes. Explosion, explosion, explosion. 2 seconds of exposition, explosion, explosion, explosion. 10 more characters walk on the screen. It's like, this doesn't work for me. Now something like Logan and Deadpool, where it focuses on one character, they just work a lot better. There's an actual story there. And I think with Wonder Woman, it tapped into that. And I think that's the future of the genre. I'm hoping there's a Gambit film coming down the line. That one I'll be super stoked for. He's like my favorite comic book character by far. But I think that's the future of the genre, and I think Wonder Woman sort of shows that. Okay, enough of that. Number 5 this weekend was Cars 3 with a 60% drop. Now let's keep that in mind. 60% drop, lost 680 screens. This is, I feel like, kind of a disaster for Disney. No one asked for Cars 3. Cars 2 did very well. But when you're dropping 60%, and maybe it's because of the holiday. Maybe it's people are going to go see it today and tomorrow, or today and Monday they saw it. But this is a 60% drop on any weekend for one of these movies, unless it's like the 7th weekend or 8th weekend. It's just bad news. Cars 2 up to this point was at 148 million, and Cars 3 is only 120. So it's not horrifically bad. It's 28 million off the last one. It's total, Cars 2 did 191 million. That's not adjusted, but it's only 6 years ago, so who cares? Where's this one going to end up? I'm thinking if it's already 28 off, at least 28 off. You're looking at maybe 150s, 160s. Not good. Just, it's one of those films, if the drops keep happening, like 60%, kids film, you're going to want a 40% drop in these initial weekends and nothing more than that. Probably even 30% is a lot safer, obviously, because these films, they want a 4x, 5x multiplier, right? That's just not going to happen with this one. It opened at 53. It's just going to get to a 3x multiplier. To me, that's the Mendoza line. If you don't know what a Mendoza line is, look it up on Wikipedia. It's an old baseball term. But the point is that's the line where it becomes a failure. And the Mendoza line for a children's film, especially if it doesn't open like insanely massive, this one did, it only opened at 53, is a 3x multiplier. We talked about this with Despicable 3. If a children's film by a major studio and a wide release does less than a 3x multiplier, or even kind of close to it, that's bad news. That's failure. Like, these movies should be, printing money for 4 or 5 weeks, no problem. And again, the problem here is quality. It seems like it's not timing. I mean, it comes out in the middle of June. Kids aren't in school now. It just, people did not connect with this one. Nor did critics. 68% Rotten Tomatoes, only 75% audience score. The cinema score is probably an A. I gotta look it up now. Yeah, well, of course it was an A. What else would it be? That's why I don't like cinema score. It's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, so you survey the people that go see the film the Thursday and Friday when it comes out. Okay, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There are things wrong with that. Number one, the nice thing about it is you get the score by Friday at like 11 midnight East Coast time. They usually have the score posted, so you get like early reaction. The problem with that is it's a completely biased group of people, right? Like, the people who go to see it first are super excited about the film, and they're also going to have like an inability to really criticize the film, because when you're super stoked and hyped for a film, like right when you get out of it, there's no way you're going to admit to yourself that it was terrible. That rarely happens. I'll give you an example. Summer of 2004, I was living in Minneapolis with some old high school friends, and I was working at like a garden center, kind of just like in the back room, sweeping floors and driving a forklift. It was a really actually fun job. I really loved it. The first month I got to Minneapolis, probably May, the trailer for Garden State dropped, and me and my friends were so overwhelmed by how good the trailer was that we would sit up in one of my friends' rooms and just watch the trailer over and over again. No, I'm in this is one of my early 20s or whatever. I was a lot nerdier then. That's not true. I'm much nerdier now. But I admit it now. I wouldn't admit it back then. We sat there and watched that trailer over and again. So the hype for that, and it wasn't coming out till August. It actually came out like the weekend I left Minneapolis. It wasn't coming out till August. And the hype built the entire summer. We would watch the trailer like 10, 20 times a week. And we'd just be so hyped for this film to come out. And then when it comes out and we go and see it, it's like this huge event. Everybody from the house we were living in went to go see it. And when I'm sitting there watching, I can envision myself in that theater seeing it and then walking out and being like, oh yeah, like it was really, really good. But then deep down inside, maybe unconsciously, I thought it was terrible. But I wouldn't say that. And that's why cinema score is kind of just so skewed to me. It's always skewed way higher than you think. And so an A cinema score from Cars 3 doesn't mean that much to me. What means a lot more to me, and it's less scientific, of course, and someone doesn't pay to do it, but the Rotten Tomato score of 75%, that's a big deal. Now, obviously, there's huge biases there because you see what people score before you score it, right? So there's a huge bias there. So it tends to, I think that what ends up happening there is it tends to push down up or down your score based on what the score is at. So if you thought it was like a 90%, you see it at a 75, you're going to score it like an 85. And the reverse is also true. But I have more faith in this one, the Rotten Tomato score stuff and the Metacritic score, just because it just seems, I don't know, it seems cinema score was invented in the 70s with its people literally going to the theater and surveying them. There's something to be said for that, but it's 2017. It's 40 years later. Like, we need to like update this system a little bit. And so I have a little bit more faith in the Rotten Tomato sort of audience scores with people just voting on it online. The whole point of that rant was that Cars 3 not a great movie, and its multiplier kind of shows that it'll end up in the 150, 160, if it's lucky 170 range. Not a great performance for that movie at all. This is going to be a long episode because there's a lot to talk about. Number 6 was The House. This is the rated R Amy Poehler, Will Ferrell comedy that I've had my eye on for 6 months. I invested in it way back on Hollywood Stock Exchange 6 months ago just because of the premise I thought was fantastic. Ended up with $8.7 million for the 3-day. That is epically bad. This is a massive, massive flop. Only saved from further embarrassment by its probably $30 to $40 million production budget. It's not like John Carter where it cost $200 million and made like 10 its first weekend. Financially, it's not the biggest flop in the world, but I think creatively it is. It's a massive failure for Will Ferrell, Warner Brothers, New Line, everybody associated with it. I think Mariah Carey was also in this film or something. I don't know. Apparently there's a huge ruckus on the set with her. I don't think that has anything to do with the film failing. It just sort of like, I don't know, just maybe the film was cursed or something. Its per theater average was only 27. It's under the $3,000. There's different Mendoza lines, and one of the Mendoza lines for opening weekend major releases is the 3K per theater. If you're over 3K per theater, it's not like you did amazing, but it's sort of like you saved yourself some really big embarrassment. This is embarrassing that I went under 3K per theater for a major release like this. I think the big story in this, even before it came out, was that there was a review embargo on it, right? Warner Brothers and New Line didn't let any reviewer release the review until the day of Friday when it came out, or I guess technically Thursday. And you're going to see why here, right? Rotten Tomatoes score from critics for The House. And keep in mind, this is Will Ferrell. Will Ferrell is a comedic institution, right? He was on Conan last week, and I fucking, for the first time in a long time, watched Conan, and I was like, this guy's amazing singing that Carpenter song. He's so, like, he is of not even, I guess, the Gen X generation. He is one of their finest comedians and comedic actors. He's an institution. And so is Amy Poehler. I mean, she's just as talented. I mean, look at her Parks and Rec run. I mean, she's an incredibly witty and multi-talented comedic actor, right? And that's what makes this failure so sad. And so it's kind of tragic that they wasted this talent. There's no way I blame them for it, I'll tell you that much. In any event, 19% when critics got a hold of it on Rotten Tomatoes, 8 fresh, 34 rotten. What you'll also notice there is only 42 reviews were released. I get the feeling that the fact that Warner Brothers embargoed it, most reviewers said, fuck it, I'm not going to review it then. Screw you. Like 42 reviews for a major release, the average is like 150. So this has 1/3, not even, of the normal number of reviews for a wide release film. Something happened here. I don't know what happened. There must have been a fight between distributors or producers. Something went wrong here. 19% on Rotten Tomatoes, 3.5 out of 10. 3.5 out of 10 from the reviewers. I mean, it's just so trashy. 32% on Metacritic. The audiences also thought it was trash. 46% of 9,000 ratings on Rotten Tomato audience score. Cinema score was B-. The one thing nice about Cinema Score is that you do know beforehand how well a film is being treated by its biggest fans. Because if we're going to go through it Thursday, Friday, they really wanted to see it. They're really hyped about it. If they give it a B-, that is bad news. B- is basically like a D+ on an unbiased A to F scale. Terrible score. And this is another rated R comedy failure. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that I went on a whole tweet storm about this. And I'll kind of summarize what I was talking about. And I talked about this, God, I want to say a couple of months ago, where I walked through the history of rated R comedies. I really should write a book on this at this point. I've done so much research. Basically, the gist of it is that rated R comedies used to be this huge moneymaker. And the golden years for that were 2009 to 2012. That's when you had Ted do 237 million, Hangover 2 did 277, Bridesmaids did 184 million, Hangover 1, obviously in 2009, did 319 million. That was really the golden age, and everything has kind of like dropped off since then. In the last year, in terms of rated R comedies, we've had a lot of flops. We had Rough Night about a month and some ago, whenever it came out, flop. Baywatch was a flop. Snatched was a flop. Nice Guys came out last summer. Kind of a cold hit, one of my favorite films from last year, but also a big flop. Fist Fight from this year was a flop. Why Him from last Christmas, sort of a flop. Xmas Christmas Party, kind of a flop. I think it did like 50, 60, something like that. War Dogs was a flop. The last real breakout rated R comedy that we had was Sausage Party, which was last year, did 97 million, I believe, in August. And Bad Moms, which had an insane multiplier and did $113 million last year. That, I mean, they already have a Christmas movie of that Bad Moms coming out. It looks awful. But also last year, you had Neighbors 2 flop massively and Keanu flop. I mean, we're talking like the hit to flop ratio of major studio wide release rated R comedies over the last year. I mean, I'd put it like maybe 10% are hits, not even, maybe 5% are hits. So there's an issue here. There's an issue, and like the whole genre has changed a lot. Now I was in my 20s, super into movies about a decade ago, and I sort of, I guess, I don't want to say became obsessed, but I was very aware that something was happening in comedy and films. You know, I was watching movies like 40-Year-Old Virgin, Wedding Crashers, Knocked Up, Superbad, and like there was just this group of films that were fantastic. And I talked before on the podcast, the first time I saw Old School, that's when I really noticed it in 2003. I had never laughed that hard in a theater in my entire life. I was doubled over. Same thing happened with Wedding Crashers and Knocked Up and Superbad and 40-Year-Old Virgin. You know, it's like something happened in the mid-2000s creatively. It was a renaissance, right? You could say, oh, maybe it started with American Pie in 99, and that's, you know, maybe kicked it off, or maybe that's why they spent money on like Road Trip and Old School. But I really think those mid-2000s rated R comedies were a creative renaissance that was cashed in on by the major studios in the latter half of the decade with your Teds and your Hangovers and your Bridesmaids. And something's gone horribly wrong. Like the last rated R comedy to make $150 million the box office was 22 Jump Street in 2014, but he also had like Horrible Bosses 2 in 2014. That's when it really started to fall off the face of the earth. And of course, me being a nerd and having access to some good numbers, you know, the rated R comedy total box office take, and these are all adjusted for inflation, peaked in 2011. They did basically just over $1 billion at the box office domestically. And then 2012, 2013, very similar numbers, over $1 billion. In 2014, it drops down to 900 million. 2015 down to 876. Last year, $609 million total the box office for rated R comedies. So it's starting to decline pretty rapidly. And you can see that with all of the flops that I listed, like the 15 flops that I talked about. So the whole point of this is like, what's happening? Is The House and its poor performance just an extension of a genre sort of collapsing, kind of like rom-coms did over the last decade? Even the last rom-com that made over like $200 million. You can't. I think it was like Hitch or like Big Fat Greek Wedding like 15 years ago. That genre died, and I'm kind of wondering if the rated R genre that I think outside of, you know, American Pie, like Old School, Wedding Crashers, and the Judd Apatow and Todd Phillips world created, I wonder if that's over. You know, I wonder if people just got sick of those comedies or aspects of that genre. You know, maybe people just got sick of it, you know, just the improv style, because that's a key aspect of the mid-2000s rated R comedy renaissance. Is a lot of it comes from the improv world. Most of the actors involved in those films, got their start at Groundlings, Upright Citizens Brigade in New York, or Second City in Chicago. Maybe people are kind of over that. And maybe that's why The House did so poorly. Because look, the quality's bad, of course, whatever. But comedies, for all intents and purposes, aren't usually about quality. They certainly can be, and if they're done well and the critics love them, they usually do pretty well. But, in the past, just because a movie got a 19% on Rotten Tomatoes doesn't mean that it's not going to make some real money. An $8 million opening for The House is it's really bad. This thing needed to open at least at 20 million. Like, there's no reason it shouldn't with Will Ferrell and Amy Poehler as the leads. I mean, I saw that on paper and I was like, well, this is a win-win for everybody, right? Like, there's no way this movie can fail with those two in the lead. But it did. And so you got a couple things involved. Is it the fact that the rated R comedy genre is dying off that it did so well, or is it just that and the fact that it was such a shitty movie? My best guess is that it just wasn't funny enough. And I know that seems like a cop-out, right? But if you saw the trailer to this, you'd be like, that's really not that funny. Like, being funny is an art form. It's very hard to do. And if you cut a trailer for a film, you're supposed to take, at least, the second or third funniest lines and put them in there to get people in the theater. You should leave the best stuff for the theater because that's when people are really excited, right? And they come out of it like, oh, that was hilarious. In this case, there wasn't even funny enough lines to put in the trailer, so I can't even imagine what was in the film. So you have a confluence of a lot of these different things happening at the same time. You got the poor quality of the film. You have the dying genre of the rated R comedy. Maybe it was just a perfect storm, or maybe, and this is a whole nother avenue, it was marketed terribly and just a really shitty film, and I got the impression through the marketing, I've been following it for 6 months, so I've been seeing what's happening with it. I got the impression that Warner Brothers knew it was trash, either through test screenings or their producers, executive producers saw it, or the studio head saw it and were like, this is awful. I don't know what we're going to do with this. So they dumped it during the summer. And they didn't give it a great marketing campaign. I looked at its Twitter account, it had like 1,500 followers. I mean, that's outrageous. So low. I don't know if they really backed the film well enough here. So I think, the culprit here is a lot of things. But if I had to choose one aspect of it, despite the fact that I've talked about rated R comedies dying, they still can work. Trainwreck worked last year, right? I think it was last year, 2 years ago. Bad Moms worked. Sausage Party worked. So it's not like all rated R comedies are doomed. That's not it. You just have to make a really fucking funny movie and market it really well for it to be successful. And that maybe wasn't the case like back in 2007 or 8. It was a little different, or 2011. You could just make an okay movie, market it okay, and it's going to do well. That's not the case anymore. It's like just a lot more competitive. So this one's going to fall off the face of the earth. A huge debacle. Massive flop for Warner Brothers with The House, and I think it's going to drop like 60% next week because no one wants to see this piece of trash. All right, number 7. Wow, this is a long one. Oh well, is what it is. 47 meters, $4.5 million for the weekend. This one also blows my mind. I don't understand why this is doing so well. I love shark movies, but I could tell right away this is a direct-to-VOD movie when I saw the trailers for it and stuff. But people are going to see it. I don't get it. 4.5 million, a 36% drop from last weekend. It only lost 200 theaters. Per theater average is still $2,000 per theater. It is sitting at 32.4 million so far. Is this the highest straight to VOD film that's been released in the theaters take ever? I bet you that it is. I don't think there's any other example of a film released last year on VOD that goes on to make $32 million at the box office the year afterwards. Cool story, really fascinates me, and I'm gonna keep an eye on that one. Number 8 was The Beguiled. This is a Sofia Coppola film. Did 3.1 million this weekend. Bumped up 670 theaters. They're really making a go on this one. Great per theater average on this sort of art film from Focus Features. $4,700 per theater. That's great. Total take so far is just basically what it did this weekend, 3.48 million. I'm interested to see where this one goes. Its releasing schedule is really, or sort of the way they staged the release is really odd to me. Like, why are you adding 670 screens on the July 4th weekend for what is essentially an art film? I don't know, but it seems to be paying off pretty well, because if you're near 1,000 screens and you're north of 4K per theater, that's not bad, especially for a focus feature movie like this. We'll keep an eye on that one as well, but a pretty good performance from Beguiled. I kind of wonder though, like, once it gets out of that, let's say there's like 1,000 theaters that like cater to like artier crowds. Like, I wonder what's going to happen when it gets out to Omaha and San Antonio or something like that. Like, I think it's going to die a quick death, which is why it confuses me why they even did this release pattern anyways. Number 9 was The Mummy, 51% drop, 2.9 million, lost 1,200 screens. This one's going away real quick. 1,600 per theater average, and its fourth weekend. Total take so far is 75 million. This has, I think Deadline said it's going to lose at least $90 million total for Universal. This was supposed to launch an entire universe of films, so that's a terrible performance for The Mummy. I think it's only going to get worse. Number 10, still sticking in there, was Pirates of the Caribbean, 2.5 million, 53% drop. Lost about 800 theaters this weekend. Per theater average was 1,500. Total take so far 165. Hey, 165 on when it opened at, that's not horrific. It did cost $230 million to make. It actually cost about 300, I bet. They're definitely lying about that. I think that, just like Transformers, this is the death of the series. I don't see how they move forward with it unless they reboot it. It's not going to happen. The other stuff that came out, or other stuff to talk about, so the top 10. All Eyes on Me dropped 70% this weekend. I think it dropped 78% last weekend. That sucks, because I mean it's done $43 million so far, but it lost half of its theaters this weekend. Its per theater average is below 1,500, so this one will disappear quite quickly. It got its money and it ran. There's nothing wrong with that. The fact that it made $42 million is already surprising to me. So, it is dropping massively and will disappear, but I think it made the money it needed to make in its first couple of weeks. Also, just outside the top 10 was The Big Sick, and this is what I'm really going to watch closely. Did 1.6 million, added 66 screens. Remember last weekend it was super limited release on 5 theaters. Its per theater average was the number to look at for a film like this is 23,000. It needs to be higher than that to break out into the wide release. So I'm kind of skeptical that that's going to. If it was in the $30,000, $35,000 range at 71 screens, I'd be like, okay, there's something here. There's some meat on the bones to this. Like, this could play in the Omaha and the San Antonio market and kind of do well. 23 in those 71 markets, that's just, it's not good enough. And whatever. The movie's amazing from what I hear. It's one of the best reviewed movies of the year. There's Oscar buzz for people involved in the film. So maybe it comes back around later in the year or early next year when the Oscars buzz starts happening. But I thought there was a chance that this was going to make a run at wide release and do really well. I don't see it happening. I could be wrong though. We'll see how that per theater average changes as it adds screens each weekend. But once it starts stepping into the teens and it's not at like 1,000 screens yet, then that's a problem. I think that's mostly it. Not too much else to talk about. Guardians 2 still in theaters, 383 million. Boss Baby is somehow still in the theaters, $173 million so far. Fate of the Furious is in its 12th week, still in 144 theaters. It's made $225 million so far. Amazing. I think the record for the biggest sort of big film that's still in the theaters is Beauty and the Beast at 16 weeks. Still in 156 theaters, $503 million so far. The number one movie of the year so far. And it probably will be until, I guess, Star Wars comes out. So that was a rundown of what happened last weekend. Let's talk a little bit about very quickly what's coming out next week. I guess this weekend, you could say. It's Spider-Man Homecoming. Come on, it's the reboot. It's the second reboot of a series in 14 years, I guess, 13 years. Weird. I don't get it. Look, I don't know what's going on. It's now it's an MCU film. You know, the talk of it's going to do $100 million is sort of what tracking is saying. I don't know. I get a bad feeling about this one, that it's just not going to perform. This is, I've gone on long enough, I think, but just quickly, one of my skepticisms of the comic book movie genre comes from Spider-Man, and the fact that the first one was kind of fun. And I saw the second one in the theater and absolutely fucking hated every second of it. I hated the audience. I hated the movie. It seemed so superfluous. And you gotta remember, this is 2004. Things were kind of serious back then. We had 9/11. We just started the war with Iraq in 2003. It was a weird political, social, cultural vibe in America at the time. And Spider-Man 2 just rubbed me the wrong way. Like, it was just like the exact opposite of what I wanted to see on screen. I wanted to see something like Batman Begins or Dark Knight. Like, that felt appropriate response to what was happening. Spider-Man 2 did not. In any event, people absolutely love Spider-Man 2. It did really well. Obviously, the third one, and then you have the reboot, which I think was incredibly ill-advised. They did two of them. They did okay. And then rebooting it again to fit it back in the MCU, it just seems so cynical to me. And they obviously just want to make a lot of money. And look, the comic book people, I love them to death. They're the best nerds in the world. They're going to go see this and probably really love it. I don't think general audiences are going to go see this. Spider-Man is one of the most beloved fictional characters in existence now. I don't know. I'm thinking it's going to go sub 100, and that's sort of my take on it. And then after that, we got War of Planet of the Apes is on the 14th, Wished Upon, small little horror film coming out on the 14th. Although it's wide release, I've seen a lot of trailers for it. It's from Broad Green Pictures, so it's not a major studio. And then later in the month, you got Dunkirk, Girls Trip, Valerian, the pre-bomb bomb. Everybody knows it's going to bomb. No one's told anybody involved with the film yet. Atomic Blonde and the Emoji Movie round out July. Kind of a pretty full month. The 21st is the big one with a lot of movies coming out. But the tone's going to be set by Superman. I think this weekend Despicable Me was underwhelming, which has kind of been the case outside of Wonder Woman this year for huge blockbusters. They've done okay. Pirates did terrible, and Transformers is not doing well at all. So definitely in the flop-ish territory. Spider-Man, I feel like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Spider-Man's going to be this huge, massive hit. I just don't feel it, though. It just feels like another blockbuster that's going to underwhelm. And I think the same thing with War of Planet of the Apes. Maybe Dunkirk can pull it. It is a kind of a full July, but I just don't see any huge massive hits that are going to make $350 or $300 million. What's coming out so far in the rest of the summer that's going to even parallel Beauty and the Beast? Because that's the range that we're looking at these days in terms of success. I don't see it at all. In any event, thanks for listening, guys. Definitely check out my Twitter, at the wild line. It's at the _wild_line. I'll put and post a lot there throughout the week, kind of my random thoughts. So get a little preview of the podcast because I'm going to regurgitate what I say on Twitter on the podcast. Anyway, I really appreciate you guys listening. I really love doing this, and I hope you enjoy it too. So take care. I'll be back next week.